All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. It is 10:55. We have about an hour left in the symposium. And in this final hour, we're going to be joined by the Honorable Catherine McKenna. And Catherine McKenna is a former Minister of the Environment and Climate Change, as you will all likely know. She has, in her past role, spearheaded groundbreaking environmental initiatives across Canada, including lead negotiating the Paris Agreement, including successfully defending landmark legislation to establish a carbon price and leading efforts to phase out coal, reduce plastics, and double the amount of nature protected in Canada. What is she doing today? She will tell you more about that, but she is the founder of Climate and Nature Solutions, and that is an organization that works with governments and not-for-profits and the private sector to scale practical climate and nature-based solutions. She also is the chair of the UN Secretary General's new high-level expert group on net zero commitments of non-state entities. And she recently launched Women Leading on Climate at COP26. So please welcome Catherine McKenna.
Hello. Can you all hear me?
I think they can. If I can, they can.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so I am thrilled to be joining Kingston. Hello, Kingston. Sadly, virtually, although I have made many trips to Kingston, often with your local member of parliament, Mark Gerritsen, to make announcements, climate-related announcements, both when I was Minister of Environment and Climate Change, as well as Minister of Infrastructure and Communities. And so I love Kingston. I love what's going on in Kingston in terms of climate action. And I hope we'll have a really good conversation. I'll do a bit of talking. But then I'm really excited to hear the questions from everyone who's joined. So what am I going to talk about? One, I want to talk about life in a net zero city. We got to do maybe a little imagining of what the future looks like, but actually much of it is here and I've seen it. Two, I'm going to talk about what it means to be net zero. And as Ali mentioned, I was asked by the UN Secretary General to chair an expert group that was looking at net zero commitments of non-state entities. Really, what are we talking about? That includes cities and regions, it includes businesses, and it includes financial institutions like banks. And then the third thing I want to talk about is what you can do on climate action, because I think that's the most exciting thing, because everyone needs to be part of making sure that we build a cleaner future. And it's going to be an awesome and a better future for so many reasons. Both in terms of it will protect the planet that we love and ensure a sustainable future for next generations. But it would also mean things like cleaner air, cleaner water, a healthier lifestyle, and also a more inclusive communities and good jobs. So all those good things. All right, so I can't see you folks, but if you want, you can do this as an experiment. You can close your eyes. I want you to imagine what life is in a net zero city. Okay, you wake up in the morning. Your lights go on immediately, your heat goes up. Your electricity management app helps you make really smart choices so you don't waste energy. Why waste energy you don't need? Because it costs you money, and we can be way more efficient. Your house is heated and cooled by an energy efficient heat pump rather than a furnace or air conditioner, and it's really transferring heat and cooling. It's super energy efficient. Your house has a small bank of solar panels on the roof, integrated into a charging port and the batteries of your EV. So you're not only lowering your carbon footprint, but you're also making money by selling extra energy to the grid, and you're acting as a battery. Your house is acting a battery by storing excess energy from the local grid, which shifts power loads around the region as needed. You rarely pay much in your electricity bill. Who doesn't like that? And your car is ready to go in the morning. You used a tax credit a long time ago to retrofit your home, and now it produces almost as much energy as you use. The small amount of waste that you produced, and thankfully we've banned single-use plastics, is sent to a waste facility that you deal with recycling, but you also convert non-recyclable and non-compostable waste into energy. If you live in an apartment or you live in social housing, it's been built to a passive standard, which means that not only is it highly energy efficient with very low utility costs, but it also has really good air quality and it's very comfortable. And as an example, I visited a social housing project in Ottawa where it was built to the passive standard for individuals living with mental illness. And the estimated cost to heat each studio apartment per year was $27. Who doesn't like that? For young people, we have affordable, energy efficient condos, and we've really focused on intensification. So you live downtown and you can walk to work or take public transit, and your bills are extremely low because these are all net zero. Now you have many choices to get to work or school or to get your groceries. Take your electric vehicle if you have one. Why would you pay for gas? There are charging stations all over, including at your local grocery chains, hardware stores, as well as the post office. Or you can hop onto a local electric bus that's made by a Canadian company like Lion Electric, New Flyer. You can jump on, if you're in a bigger city, on an LRT or a metro. And guess what? They're free to all young people, seniors, and low-income individuals to really ensure that they have the options to take good transit. If you're going to school, most kids bike. Because guess what? We prioritized proper and safe cycling. And if you're a kid at school, your school is covered in solar panels. You also have community gardens. And this is not only good for the environment, it's a great learning experience for young people. And when you're outside, you notice the air is a lot cleaner without all these cars, all these internal combustion cars, I should say. It's also a lot quieter too. You get into your office, it's in a local industrial park, and it's completed a major retrofit to district heating and cooling. And it also uses AI to ensure that it's absolutely efficient on when it uses energy. You want to work out, got to be healthy. You have so many options. The city has built active transit pathways all over and trails throughout town. So you can go for a walk, you can go for a cycle, heck, you can go ride your electric bike, or you can get on your skateboard. And all these paths connect the downtown to the suburbs and to rural areas. Or you can even go jump off the Gord Downey Pier. Who doesn't love that? I've done that. It's a free and accessible pier connecting people and families to water. Or you can go to the local pool, which is heated in part by recovered waste heat from the hockey arena, which serves as a source for the facility's heat pump loop. There's an indigenous community that's close to the town, and it's decided to own its own destiny. It owns a wind farm that's producing good energy, good clean energy, and creating jobs. And as we all know, reconciliation is a huge priority, and too often we have seen indigenous communities negatively impacted by resource development. Now they're owning their own destiny. There's a booming local economy. Many new businesses have been attracted by the low energy costs and the emissions-free grid, as well as a vibrant, healthy community and the educated workforce. And that's not just a myth, that's happening. We know that in Kingston, when you have Li-Cycle and Unicord, where they actually have come and chosen Kingston because it's the emissions-free grid and a great community. So that's what life can look like in a net zero city. I should say at the city level, you have a heat officer and an adaptation officer. What do they do? Well, with a heating planet, we know, even if we do everything we can, that the planet is going to continue to warm, and that's very dangerous at times with extreme weather. So with extreme heat, you have a heat officer who spends a lot of time thinking about how do we ensure that people are protected from heat. But the good news is your city's planted so many trees, so they act as a natural cooling agent. You also have an adaptation strategy, because with extreme weather, that can flood your sewer systems, or it can have an impact on on the city when it comes to extreme storms and waves. So you now have someone who spends all of their time thinking about smart solutions. So That's what the future can look like, but that's not just the future, that's actually now. When I was Minister of Environment and Climate Change, and as I said, infrastructure as well, I saw these solutions around Canada, but also around the world. And we have the solutions. The trick is we just have to be smarter and we need to use them. All right, so let's talk about net zero. So as I mentioned, I was asked last year, I left politics, you probably know that. I was asked by the UN Secretary General to chair an expert group on net zero commitments of cities and regions, businesses, and financial institutions like banks. So why did he ask me to do this? So one, we know the world needs to get to global net zero, that we need to ensure that warming stays well below 2 degrees, striving for 1.5 degrees of warming. If we want to make sure that we limit the worst aspects of climate change. And that means that action now is absolutely critical. So we are making progress, but instead of being on track to reduce emissions by half by 2030, emissions are set to increase by 11% by then. We are still very far from where we need to be. And this is a make or break moment. And if you've listened to the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, he's awesome. He doesn't mince his words, and he just wants us to do what we can do and what we need to do. And we're all seeing the impacts of climate change. We're seeing it in Canada with extreme weather events, whether it's storms that we've never seen before, whether, and we saw that in PEI, still recovering from an extreme storm, but we saw the town of Lytton, it literally incinerated because of extreme heat. Looking around the world, Pakistan, half of Pakistan was underwater, and Africa is seeing one of its worst droughts in a decade. That the impacts of climate change are now, and we don't have time to waste. But the Secretary General was also very concerned about greenwashing. So who's concerned about greenwashing? I'm seeing the thumbs up come up sometimes. You can always give thumbs up if you like what I say. I see a lot of stuff. Oh, whoa. Okay, we've got an engaged audience. You guys are super concerned about greenwashing. Well, the Secretary General was concerned about greenwashing too, because while in the good news, 90% of the world's global economy is covered by net zero pledges, a lot of them aren't real. And in particular, you are seeing some businesses, some financial institutions that are doing things that are absolutely inconsistent with being a climate leader. So if you put up your hand and you say, I'm a climate leader, I'm net zero, you got to be taking the action, you got to be walking the walk. That includes cities as regions as well. As he said, we urgently need every business, investor, city, state, and region to walk the talk on their net zero promises. We can't afford slow movers, fake movers, or any form of greenwashing. So what does that actually mean? So what did we do in this report? So the good news is I'm super practical. So the report had 10 recommendations, and they were really, what are you required to do if you are making a net zero pledge, including by a city? So Kingston has made a net zero pledge. And what can you not do? So well, first of all, it's not actually that complicated. In climate world, we sometimes talk not like real people. We talk about things like even net zero sounds really weird. We talk about mitigation. We talk about 2050, where no one really understands what 2050 means because it's so far out. That really what we need to do is ensure that emissions go down immediately and ambitiously. Money needs to stop flowing to fossil fuels, and money needs to flow at scale to renewable energy and clean solutions in all communities and all countries around the world. And we need to ensure a just and equitable transition for all. That ensures that we think about workers who are in communities where they're involved in fossil fuels. They need good jobs, but it also includes making sure that we're thinking about our most vulnerable, whether it's Indigenous peoples who are often the most impacted in climate change, or countries who have done the least to cause climate change but are suffering the impacts. I'll give you a funny story. So Australians are actually quite good when it comes to climate comms. Most people are terrible. I work on it. So one of the ad agencies did a story. So it was about a Sydney man. So the Sydney man goes to a pub and he says, hey, he's so excited to tell his friends. He's like, guess what? I'm going to give up alcohol. And he said, I'm going to give it up, though it needs to be orderly transition. So I'm not going to, get into this too quickly. I'm going to give up alcohol by 2050. But I often didn't drink on Sunday nights, so I'm going to get credit for that. So actually, it's going to be 2052 or 2055. I'm not sure. And guess what? I'll be 101 then. And he says, then the kind of nerdy punchline for those of you who really care about climate. And he said, I've got a beer fridge and I call it carbon capture and storage. So that's my joke, because we do also have to have a bit of a sense of humor about this. But the bottom line is we can't wait till 2050. As my son says, he's like, I don't know, the mayors of cities or the CEOs of companies, are they even going to be alive in 2050? He's 13. He's pretty, he's pretty committed. He's someone who also tells me every day, what have I done to tackle climate change? So he keeps me honest. So let's talk about what our report said, because I think this is not just about what the city of Kingston can do and what you can do, but what we need to do to hold folks accountable. Because honestly, if we don't hold folks accountable, including large corporations and financial institutions like banks, we're never going to get there. And the good news is you guys can have influence. You can do it through your pocketbook, how you spend your money, what companies you decide to support. You can do it by advocating, by being out in the streets, by calling folks out. Young people or anyone, you can decide to only work for companies that you believe in, organizations that are committed to real action on climate change. If you're a retiree, you can make sure that the money, your pension, is not going to support new fossil fuel infrastructure. So you have power. But what should you do if you see a company or a city or a region or a bank saying they're net zero? There are things they need to do. And as I say, like, I'm just a practical person. So this is what you need to do. And the city of Kingston, they're working on this too. So it is really important that we all do this. You have to have a short and medium term target. You can't just say 2049. You have to have a target 2025, 2030, 2035. It has to be aligned with the science of 1.5 degrees. You have to know your baseline. What are your emissions right now? And that actually is good for people too. Like, think about in your house, your apartment, your life, what are the emissions that you're causing? Because you need to understand your emissions, because then you need to reduce them. So you need to have a detailed plan showing how you're going to immediately reduce your absolute emissions. So in some places, sometimes companies, including oil and gas companies, say they've reduced the intensity of their emissions. The planet, well, that might be an interesting measure. In some cases, the planet doesn't care about the intensity of emissions. They care about your absolute emissions. Emissions need to go down. Remember, I said that at the beginning. Also, money needs to go from dirty to clean. That has to happen. If we keep on investing in new fossil fuel infrastructure, it is literally impossible to stay 1.5 degrees of warming. 80% of the problem is caused by fossil fuels. That's just a fact. You need to have a detailed transition plan showing how you're going to reduce emissions. You need to report publicly and transparency on progress. And then there's some red lines. I think we have to have red lines. What can you not do? Cannot claim to be net zero while continuing to build or invest in new fossil fuel supply. That is just inconsistent. You cannot lift your hand up, say, I'm a climate leader, and I am an oil and gas company, or I'm a bank investing in new fossil fuel supply. Now, people will say, well, the war in Ukraine. What we have seen in Europe is actually many European countries have used this opportunity to actually do things that they could never do before, which is actually be even more ambitious on climate action. And it's the International Energy Agency. It's not me. It's not it's not some random person or environmentalist saying that we can't invest in new fossil fuel supply. It's the International Energy Agency. That we already have existing fossil fuel infrastructure, which we obviously need to move to renewables, but we can't be investing in new fossil fuel supply. It's just inconsistent, and we will not be able to meet the goals that all the countries in the world agreed to in the context of the Paris Agreement. And that also includes you cannot engage in deforestation. That also is not consistent, and it has negative impact because obviously you're not only not allowing nature to absorb emissions, you're releasing the emissions. Can't buy cheap credits. So I think there's a lot of discussion now about credits. Can't just buy cheap credits to get out of your emissions problems. We've seen a lot of the credits lack integrity. And in fact, often hurt Indigenous people. So you need to prioritize cutting your own emissions across your value chain. So if you're a company, you need to think about your suppliers too. Now, you may think this is really nerdy, but I'm kind of nerdy because I just want to count. We need to measure what matters, and we need to make sure folks are making progress. And I want you all to be educated. So when you see someone saying they're a climate leader, they're net zero, you can assess and ask the right questions to see if they are. You can't say you're a climate leader and lobby against positive climate action. Some of you might remember that I was the minister that put a price on pollution, carbon pollution. That was really hard. There were people who didn't like it and they lobbied against it. But if you're going to be a climate leader, a business or a bank, financial institution, you need to be lobbying for the action that's going to help you reduce your emissions. The good news, and actually this was a bit of a positive story, there were certainly some folks, including regional governments, that were not supportive of carbon pricing and took us all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada, where we won. But we had a coalition. I created the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition, which included major financial institutions, manufacturing companies, including one oil and gas company who said we needed to price pollution. That's how you're going to get action, when you have governments working with business, working with people. Okay. So that's really, I want you guys to be on the lookout. If, even for the city of Kingston, they said they're going to be net zero. You need to be doing the work. You need to be showing the work. Your emissions need to be going down. And the good news is there's so many good stories for Kingston. I'll tell a few of them now, but if you go and look on the city's website, maybe someone can put it up there. There's a great one-pager. You can see it here. That talks about, highlights some of the initiatives that Kingston is doing to reduce emissions, tackle climate change, be more resilient, and also build a more awesome and equitable community. I think it's great. It's good you also always have to talk about what you're doing, because often people don't know if you're doing good things. And a shout out to Kingston also, because Kingston was the first city in Ontario to announce that there was a climate emergency. You got to understand the science if you're really going to act. So kudos to Kingston. And I want to give a shout out to the city of Kingston for everything it's doing, but also the local partners. So there's a lot of local community organizations. You have major employers like the university and Queen's, but also I know the base is doing a lot. And you have all these great companies that are popping up. I should say I was at the hospital, I believe, and they were doing a great retrofit. So lots of good action, and it just shows that everyone really needs to come together. And what do you need to do if you're going to reduce your emissions as a city? Well, transportation sector is one of the largest sources of emissions for cities. And by the way, cities matter. 70% of emissions are within the control of cities. So the city of Kingston has done some great things, which includes hybrid and electric vehicles for the city. But also, I was at a great announcement of electric buses. And remember, I talked about climate is about inclusivity and jobs. Well, the good news is some people don't have access to cars. They can't afford cars. That's often students, seniors, low-income individuals. And so we need good transportation options for them. So that's great, but also jobs. Did you know that a huge number of electric buses are made in Canada? Woo, that's great. There's also been huge investment in electric vehicle charging stations. We need to make sure that charging stations are available everywhere, but also that we prioritize cycling and safe cycling. I'm a cyclist. A lot of people don't cycle because it's not safe. And by the way, you can cycle in winter, because if you go to the Scandinavian countries, they're all out on their bikes. You just need the right clothes and you need safe cycling mats. All right. Buildings. Buildings are critically important, and the city of Kingston has installed solar panels on 12 buildings. It is really focused on energy efficiency. We waste so much energy. It makes no sense, because that's also wasting money. Woo, just flying off. It means that we need to look at new ways of heating things. So district heating is a great way to use like wood pellets or other sources of renewable energy so that you can actually heat a larger area. I mean, obviously moving to renewables, key, heat pumps. Has anyone heard of heat pumps? You should look into heat pumps. Waste and water. Waste. I have been to the Kingston recycling facility. So good news. Thank you to the folks there. They're working really hard. But the future is really actually not just recycling stuff that can be recycled. It's taking non-recyclables and making products out of them. That's what we need to do. And of course, we all need to reduce our waste. Adaptation in green space, critically important. We need to make sure we're adapting to the impacts of climate change. And often you can do that with nature. That, you know, if you're worried about erosion or big storms along the water, you can use nature. You can take that land and make it, you know, make it more resilient by planting trees or making it green space. Green space just in general, and this was a program I was very proud of, that we invested in opportunities to create more active transportation paths and green space. So that is something that I think is hugely important, and it means healthier lifestyles and better communities for everyone. And guess what? It's free. We need to focus on public space that is free to everyone. Not everyone has a backyard. And I think that came up loud and clear in the pandemic. And then of course, jobs. We need jobs. Everyone needs jobs. But guess what? The people that have the same skills, the skills that in, you know, current jobs have the skills that we need for the economy of the future, or the economy of today. And so you can see that, you guys. I'm from the Hamilton, and we're steel town. And guess what? We're now moving to low carbon steel. That's huge opportunity for Canada in the world. But also cars, we're moving to electric vehicles, and huge opportunities there. But also we need inventors and entrepreneurs that are doing things like Li-Cycle, that takes lithium and totally recycles the lithium and reuses the lithium. So all the young people out there, hopefully there's young people at university and colleges, you guys have a huge opportunity to figure out what are the ways that you can do, whatever you do, tackle climate change. Okay. So now I know I gotta hurry on because you guys probably have lots of questions or comments. So the good news is you guys can all do things. Everyone can participate in this because climate change is the thing. As I tell people, the thing is a thing, and the thing is climate change. And we all need to act, but all of your actions can make a huge difference. And I want to do a little bit of myth busting, because often people are like, well, Canada, we're amazing when it comes to tackling climate change. Well, you know, we worked really hard when I was minister, worked really hard to have our first ever comprehensive climate plan, to put a price on pollution, to phase out coal, to make investments across the board that would help support communities, industries, and people reduce their emissions. But the reality is that in Canada, our emissions in 2020 were 14.2 tons of CO2 per person. That's more than double the global average. By the way, Finland, a very cold country, is only 9.7 tons per person. UK is 8.5 tons per person. China is 5, and we are 6 times the 2.4 tons per person in India. So Canadians, we all have a lot of work to do. And that doesn't mean your lifestyle is going to be bad. It's just going to be, we have to be more conscientious. We also are ranked in the top 10 in terms of GHG emissions per year. And that matters, by the way. Folks say, well, what can Canada do? What does it matter if we, you know, why should we reduce our emissions? There's other countries. Well, when you're in the top 10, I think you got a problem. We're also in the top 10 for historic emissions. So I think we just have to have a bit of a reality check. And just to be clear, we need to drop the average emissions per person per year to 2 to 2.5 tons of CO2 by 2030. So we got a lot of work to do, all of us. Okay, so what can you do, and how can you be part of what the city is doing, what the country is doing, what industry is doing? One, you can save energy at home. Use less energy by lowering your heating and cooling. You can switch to everything from LED light bulbs to energy efficient electrical appliances. You can wash your laundry with cold water. You can hang things to dry instead of using a dryer. You can improve your home's energy efficiency. You can put better insulation. You can replace your furnace with an electric heat pump. All of these will reduce emissions. If possible, you can switch to renewable sources of energy, such as wind or solar. And there are new incentives from the federal government to help make your house more energy efficient. This is really important because homes, we often in Canada, we have larger homes on average, and they aren't particularly energy efficient. And we've got a cold climate, so that actually is terrible because of course we have to heat a lot. But if you have much better, thicker walls, better insulation, you're more energy efficient, you'll save a lot more money, but it's just better for the planet. I'm also looking forward to the federal government bringing in a new building code. We should have a net zero building code because I found when you provide the certainty for business, they will step up. We have the solutions. Retrofits are also a real opportunity. So there is money. I know that the city of Kingston is looking at retrofits, but the federal government has retrofit programs, and we can build a retrofit economy. We have so many buildings to retrofit. That is good jobs. Good jobs for Canadians. That's an opportunity for low carbon cement. Did you know that Canada is a leader in low carbon cement solutions? Cross laminated timber, we're also a leader. I was in San Francisco, saw a building made of cross laminated timber from Chibougamau. I don't know if I got that right, in Quebec. So we have a huge opportunity there. Transportation. All right, let's get real. We need to drive less. You can walk, bike, or take public transport, or consider an EV. The reality is we need to move off of the internal combustion engine. That is also bad for air quality. And by the way, often the folks that are the most marginalized are living by highways and roads that are very polluting. So it's actually an inequity issue. But it's also really bad. Now, the good news is the government has made a commitment to all EVs by 2035, but we can all help. We can take public transportation. We can walk or we can ride a bike. And guess what? That's better for our fitness levels. It's also good to clear your head. You can take trains. I do think that we need to look at getting high-speed rail because I think that would make a big difference. You know, in France, they have very good high-speed rail, and they now have banned all flights that are under an hour. Flights are also an issue, folks. Look at how you can fly less. You know, you could buy an electric vehicle, there are incentives, or you can share an electric vehicle. There are vehicle share programs with electric vehicles. And actually, if you think about it, most folks' cars just sit in the driveway for much of the day. It's not a very efficient way to get around. And so those are all things on the transportation side. Food. And I know you're having a great speaker on food. Well, what can we do in terms of food? We can eat more plant-based food and we can cut waste. Eating more vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds, as well as less meat and also dairy can significantly lower your environmental impact. That doesn't mean you can't ever eat meat, but you maybe should think about that and the impact. And if you eat less meat, then you're going to have a lesser impact on the climate. We waste so much food. I actually taught a course at U of T where I asked the students, they had to pitch a big idea. And one that was something that now is a little more common, but it was the Ugly Food Project. It was stop throwing away ugly food. That actually with our choices, when we go to the grocery store, we don't like ugly food. What do we care if food is ugly? It's very unfair for the banana that looks a little bit sad and it's not perfect. But the reality is by throwing away food, we're creating a ton of waste. There's also a lot of people in the world and in our communities that don't have enough food. So I think we need to think about that. How do we as communities make sure that we aren't wasting food? And there's also the opportunity with community gardens and local markets to support local farmers, but also to grow the food and get more connected to the land. Fourth, Recycle. Well, the good news is you have a great recycling program in Kingston. But the reality is we all should be thinking about how do we, consume less. And that doesn't have to be a bad thing. I think sometimes we just go by because we need a little, pick me up. But the reality is it doesn't generally last that long, and it's going to get thrown out probably at some point. So what do we need to think about that. But electronic goods. I know my kids' school, so to the students out there, they have an electronic goods recycling program. They have students that are part of the Twigs Club. They go and they have this big program, and you can bring your electronic goods. If you think about how much electronic goods we all have in our homes, apartments, we really need to make sure that we're recycling and hopefully reusing them. Fast fashion. Now this is hard because, everyone likes to look good. You can now go out and buy all the hippest new outfits every season, pretty inexpensively. But the reality is fast fashion is a real problem. Every kilogram of textiles produced generates about 17 kilograms of carbon dioxide. Well, you know what? We have this opportunity to buy great used clothes. That's all my kids do. Probably, partly for the environment, partly because I think they think it's cool. But I think that's really a real opportunity for us to reduce our carbon footprint. Be thoughtful. And, there's great opportunities to buy. Even if you like designer fashion, you can go, I guess, on Poshmark or something and find clothes. So that's also an opportunity. I don't know if anyone remembers the Patagonia campaign. I think it was like, we don't want you to buy this jacket. So it's great. Also, they said, get things fixed. Don't throw things out, just get them repaired. Reduce your use of single-use plastics. We all know this, single-use plastics. They are a huge source of emissions in terms of producing them, but they also end up in our streams and our rivers and our oceans. And they are killing animals, and they are actually ending up in us. I remember being with a scientist, and the scientist showed a bird. We were in the high Arctic, and the bird, scat, yes, poo, had little bits of plastic all the way in the high Arctic. This is what we're doing. So we really need to think about that. Reducing single-use plastics. The good news is the government is banning certain single-use plastics, but plastics, we're using too much plastics. Make your money count. This is number 7. This is a really important one. You have power. You have your purchasing power. You decide who you are going to support. When you go buy things, does that business actually care about climate action? That's something you can look into. And you can, you know what? The best way to change behavior of companies and banks is by actually, only supporting the ones that you think are consistent with your commitment to climate change and what is required to be done. Remember what I said about net zero? If they say they're net zero, there are things they need to do to show that they are committed to net zero. So you can choose companies, you can choose products that are responsible or cutting their emissions, cutting waste. Do not support fossil fuels, new fossil fuels, and don't support deforestation. So that's a good opportunity for all of you folks. You can work for a company that cares about climate action, or you can start your own. I see young people, and I talk to a lot of young people, and they're all committed to climate action, and they will choose to make less money, but work with a company or an organization that they believe cares about the planet. That's what happens when you've grown up always with the threat of climate change. You get it. You recognize how important it is that you be consistent with what your values are. You can start your own business. There's so many opportunities. I see so many young people. You can be an engineer, you can be a scientist, you can come up with climate solutions. Carbon Cure, which is a great Canadian company. Remember I said we have low carbon cement solutions. It was started by a grad student at McGill University from Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. He just had this idea about how to make low carbon cement. So you guys can do that too. Last 2, speak up and get others to join in taking action. Remember Greta? Just one person, Greta. She was sitting alone outside her parliament on Fridays because she was angry that the government wasn't taking climate action. Started a movement around the world, Fridays for the Future, young people out, but with their parents and grandparents. That's really important. And guess what? Sometimes it was hard when I was minister, when folks were saying you're not doing enough. But it helped me internally. It helps me with my colleagues to say, we have to do more. Canadians are demanding it. So demand it, speak up, talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, talk to your colleagues. Climate action is for all of us, and we need to get excited about it. It's not just negative. And I know climate grief is a real thing, but turn that grief into action. Get out there, push folks to do things, or create solutions yourselves, or create the Twigs Club at your high school or your university where you actually support climate action. And actually another cool idea at one of the high schools I was at, they had a clothing swap. So you could bring in your clothes that you didn't wear anymore and you could swap them for free. And it was great. Everyone participated. Last thing, vote. Vote. It is really important. Our voter turnout is terrible, especially we see that at the local level, the provincial level, but often at the federal level. Support political parties that believe in climate action. Support politicians that are trying to do hard things. It does really matter. I'm not going to tell you what party, go investigate the platform. I happen to be a liberal and I was working really hard on climate action. Sometimes, you know, people were disappointed in what we did, but I will tell you every day, I tried to do more. And I think that's what's important. Look at parties' platforms, but get out and support parties and politicians that are acting. Okay, I probably went over, but hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you're inspired to think about what a better net zero city looks like, a community looks like, and why it's also good for people. Everyone, it's more inclusive, but also it means just a better, healthier lifestyle with good jobs. Okay, so I see there's loads of questions. Thank you for the clapping. Thank you. It's always hard when I'm not, seeing the audience in front of me, because hopefully you are enjoying or learning something.
I'll be in front of you just to give you a tiny sample of what it feels like to have somebody in front of you, Catherine. But
all right.
Just
Thanks,
so you
Ali.
have some human interaction. Thank you very much for that. Your passion is palpable and your knowledge and your experience comes across. And I'm actually going to ask you a question. The first question I'm going to ask is connected to kind of all the shout outs you give to all the cities you see doing good things. So somebody had asked, are there cities who have made net zero commitments? Who are they, and how much have they succeeded?
Well, the good news is a bunch of cities have made net zero commitments, including, I believe, the city of Kingston, because it's part of the Global Compact of Covenant of Mayors for Climate. So there are cities big and small. And so like big cities, and often like it is quite good to look at what the leaders are doing. So Paris is a leader on climate action. That mayor, Anne Hidalgo, she's just like, we're all in. So they're doing things that can be hard. They're doing congestion pricing. Like you got to pay money if you want to go downtown in your car. Now that's obviously, congestion is a massive problem in Paris, but people didn't think she could do it. Guess what? She made huge cycling paths. So everyone now is cycling. And there are many examples. So I want to take you to Summerside, PEI. You should all go visit Summerside, PEI. It's like the City Council of Kingston and the public servants should go visit Summerside, PEI. Summerside, PEI used to be a Navy town. They closed base, so they decided to reinvent themselves. They are amazing on climate action. Like they've brought in, I actually was there for an announcement with a Korean company. Mitsubishi was there, and they had transformed their grid. So they decided they wanted a full renewable grid and batteries and proper storage. They have wind farms. They are using, I gave you the example of the hockey rink heating the swimming pool. Everyone, like the uptake in electric vehicles is huge because they have great electric vehicle charging. And these are all decisions, right? So sometimes people are like, well, it's really hard because, we're mid-sized city or we're a small town. Everyone can do it because it's just measuring what your emissions are and then figuring out how do you reduce them. And that's what I like, because I think it takes the politics out of all this. And boy, there's a lot of politics on climate change, but we should be actually focusing on science and physics and innovation. because that's the way we're going to tackle climate change. And you just need to reduce your emissions across the whole range of buckets, from transportation to buildings to waste, industry, and we can do that. So there's great examples of cities. You can go see C40 cities. That's if you want to go check out some of the
letter C,
some of the city
C40.
C40. David Miller, who used to be the mayor of Toronto. I think he is like, I don't think he's a CEO, but he's like the chair of it. There's a global covenant for mayors. There's a lot of different cities that are part of these initiatives, both big and small, and I think they provide examples. And I think that's what we need. We need more positive examples about how you do things. And then we just have to do it.
Totally. I think that's why the question was asked, because it seems like you're the type of person who really highlights who's doing well and who we can copy. There's another question. I think you basically answered it, but you know, out of respect for the person who asked it, I will ask this anyway. What kind of federal and provincial policies do we need to implement to help reach our targets? What kind of policies need to implement? I know it's a big one.
You should go look at the climate plan. There's a new improved climate plan. I helped negotiate a climate plan in 2016, but there was one released last year. And you got to do it across the board, because I tell people, like, sometimes people want to talk about climate as it's the job of the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. That's hilarious, because it's got to be across the board. You need to have a transportation strategy. So everything, like, we need to be investing in better rail, but we need to have EV charging networks across the country. We need to have incentives, because right now electric vehicles will go down, and they are going down in price, and there's more selection, but they're still a little bit more expensive in terms of the upfront costs. So there's a subsidy from the federal government, $7,500 if I'm right, for EVs. Sadly, the provincial government cut it as its first thing when it came into office, and got rid of pricing. That wasn't great. You need to have pricing. You need to price what you don't want, pollution, because right now, without a price on pollution, it's free to pollute. And I go to grade 4 classes and I ask, do you think it should be free to pollute? And they're like, boo, no. So, I mean, there's some things. We got to phase out coal. That's what we've committed to do, and clean up the grid. We need to retrofit all of our buildings, but we need to build everything to a net zero standard, which actually means cleaner, like better air quality and just a more comfortable home. So it's really an across the board thing. But you just look at buckets. You look at the transportation sector, it's about 20 to 25% of emissions, built environment, about 20% of emissions, industry, waste, and you go across the board. One thing, and I will say this because sometimes people don't like talking about this, but I'm not in politics, so I can talk about anything I want. The reality is Canada will not meet its climate targets unless it reduces emissions from oil and gas. That's just a fact. That if you look at, we could plant every tree, retrofit every building, but emissions from the oil and gas sector are going up. And this is where people talk about emissions intensity. Emissions intensity is going down. Well, if your emissions are going up, it doesn't really matter that your emissions intensity are going down, because that's having an impact on global emissions. So, I mean, but there's a whole range of things that need to happen. And then we need to think about jobs, really think strategically about jobs. You've probably seen a discussion now about this just transition legislation. I mean, not that into legislation, but the reality is we need to make sure that the folks that have great skills have jobs in the economy of the future, and we need them. Like, we need all these skills, whether it's in construction, as I talked about, the retrofit economy, or folks that are working in oil and gas. They can work, those skills are critically important in a whole range of areas, of course, renewables, but across all sectors. So I think we need to be really smart about that. But it's all hands on deck. It's all ministers. It's all portfolios. It's all areas. And it's everyone from kids to CEOs of companies.
Okay, we have 10 minutes left, a little shy of 10 minutes. So I want to get to a lot of the questions, or as many as I can.
I'll be faster.
Oh, well, I don't know. I mean, you know, what you can answer. And that's all there is to it. COP26, somebody has asked, marked a huge global commitment to net zero targets. COP27, crickets on net zero. What would you want to see in place for COP29 in 2025 as a measure of progress on net zero?
That's too late. We need it now. So the good news is I was just talking to the Secretary General. We have this report. We need everyone to live up to their promises. If you say you're going to be net zero, then you have to have a baseline. You have to show what your emissions are. You have to show how you're reducing your emissions. You have to not invest in new fossil fuel infrastructure. You can't just buy cheap credits instead of reducing your emissions. You can't lobby against climate action. We need to see all of that, and we need to see it now. And so the Secretary General is having a summit in New York in September, and he wants that the standards that we set, our expert group, and I had amazing experts from all around the world. And it wasn't, I'm not an environmentalist, I'm a recovering politician, I guess. But we had environmentalists, we had scientists, we had CEOs, we had a whole range, regulators, former regulators. So these were really smart people. We came up with what the criteria or standards are. We need folks to, the standard setters, so the bodies that kind of, if you're part of the compact covenant of mayors or whatever, to ensure that those are the standards they're using. And then we need everyone to follow them and disclose in a transparent way what they're doing. I think that's got to happen. We don't have any time, like can't be 2020, like it's got to be like now. No more 2025s, no more 2030s, like start now and show your progress. And it's hard. But hard things are hard, as I say to my kids. Like, you don't get an A for showing up and saying you're going to be net zero. You get an A if you do the work. So do the work.
Okay. I like this question. How do you get municipalities to balance those two things that they're most concerned about? Economic development on the one hand and environment on the other.
So I never see this as a balance. I mean, of course, you could say, well, we got to reduce our emissions, so you got to do that. Of course, but by reducing your emissions, you're saving money. So first of all, it's Brian Mulroney. He was a conservative. Remember Brian Mulroney? He was like, we got to conserve energy. We got to conserve our environment. That's a value. And so it's not this like you do this, you do this. Yeah, you got to be smart about what you do. But the reality is energy efficiency saves money. We waste so much energy right now. It makes no sense. It's completely bonkers. And we have cleaner solutions. Take, as I mentioned, Kingston. You guys are attracting businesses because you have low carbon energy sources. So businesses from around the world who've committed to net zero need to ensure that they have a clean grid that they're taking their energy from. So it's all an opportunity. I mean, you got to be smart about policy. And I always say, when you got to do three things when you're trying to land something. So take carbon pricing. That was really hard. It was like not always super fun fighting some folks, conservative premiers, but you need to, one, think about the policy. You need good policy. It needs to be smart. Like you can't just say, this is going to be the outcome. If I don't have some charging stations, everyone's going to buy an electric vehicle. Well, if the price is too high, or you don't have fast charging, or you don't have on-street charging for people in apartment buildings, then it's not going to work. So you got to think about the policy, and luckily, smart public servants working with politicians, they can figure it out. Two, you got to think about people. You have to think about, where are people? Like, how do you make sure that this is an irresistible option for them? Public transit, like I actually think, and so the city won't like this, it should be cheap as possible or free, especially for those who don't have a lot of other options. We need to get people to take public transit. We're making massive investments. I will say under my watch, we made massive investments. First ever electric bus program, first ever massive investments in active transportation, actually first ever active transportation strategy, all of these things. So we need people to actually use them. Now that can be hard. And I know that's a discussion with provinces in terms of the financial, the fiscal situation and the ability to do things. But I think that's really important. But costs, and of course, are important. And then you got to do the politics. I mean, you gotta we had to win. Like when I was minister, if I didn't win, if our government didn't win, we were going to lose pricing. That was like 100% for sure. So all I did is go to sleep every night petrified and thinking about how did I convince people that pricing was a good thing, that we had to price pollution, but all the money was going back. So just so you know, everyone should have gotten their check. Did everyone get their check? The climate action incentive, or it was put into your bank account, often not labeled that well by banks, sadly, but I wanted everyone to get a big check, and it just said, climate action incentive, this is you. This is what you are doing. By paying a price on pollution, you're getting more money back, but you're also helping us move to a cleaner future.
Okay. A few questions. I'm going to have to, with respect to the people who asked, we're going to have to shrink these into a few.
Sure.
I think, and there's a lot of compliments coming your way, I should say too. I'm sure, it always helps to hear that. A lot of people saying thanks for everything you do, Catherine. And one person has asked, what is your comment on the global groundwater issue that is and will hit us hard on the food front very soon?
Oh, okay. I don't exactly, I will admit when I don't totally
Yes, and that's
understand the
fine
issue.
also.
Is that like we're going to run out of water, or and that's going to be a problem? I mean, that's certainly a problem globally. Canada's actually quite lucky in that we have the largest sources of fresh water in the world, but I don't know. I'm not exactly sure what the groundwater issue. I apologize to that person. If they were
That's all
there, they
right.
could
That's
explain it
fine.
to me.
No, that is fine. Another question was, having worked in politics for so long, what is your opinion on the perspective that lack of political will is the biggest obstacle to climate action? I think you did dance around this very subject, but how can we influence slow-moving governments to take emergency level action?
I don't know, march in the streets. That actually had an impact. I would say, yeah, hey folks, I know you're like, I don't know if we should do this. This is really hard. I was like, okay, can you go look out the window? Like the Canadians want this. And there's a broader discussion that I don't have time to get into, but I've seen there are things called democratic assemblies, citizens assemblies in other countries around the world where they actually hear from citizens and they give them a problem. Climate change, like we got to reduce our emissions. These are the parameters. These are the options. And guess what? They make better solutions because sometimes politicians are scared and sometimes actually citizens are ahead of them and are actually more practical and you can depoliticize it. But I think like politicians, I have to tell everyone, be brave. Like, I don't know, did you get elected to like just hang out there? No, you got elected to do things. So go do things. And I don't know, if you lose, you lose, but I'd rather lose after, trying to do things. And by the way, Jacinda Ardern, I don't know if you guys know, she's Prime Minister of New Zealand. She's like, peace out. She's like, I did what I came to do. And, I'm tired and now I got to pass it on. And that's also an important thing. We need the younger generation out there. We need a diversity of politicians and candidates so that we can hear new voices. I think folks really are going to have to be really tough on lobbying. It is very hard. Like, you don't always get every person coming into your office, but, there is a lot of, companies saying things are really hard. You can't do this, you can't do that. That's a problem. That's a problem. You know what? I want to hear when I was in politics, I was like, okay, so what's your solution? We got to reduce our emissions. Your sector is a big problem. What are we going to do? And so I think, politicians have to be brave, but they also, they need encouragement. So good politicians do need encouragement. Like, it does matter if you vote. If you get a different government, you might lose everything on climate. So if that's important to you, then you should do that. Get involved in politics, and hold politicians accountable for their actions.
I can ask you one last question, 2 minutes left. So,
okay. Uh-oh.
I
Okay,
mean,
I'll be
somebody had
speedy.
asked you talked about a net zero building code and was asking what other specific policies would you like to see at the federal and provincial level? But before that, someone else said, what does net zero really mean? Why not real zero?
Okay, well, so that's a really good question. It's kind of a long question if you're really going to go into it. But on the science, we need to be global net zero. So that actually means that countries like Canada, probably cities like Kingston, need to be faster than 2050. Because it's easier for us. We have money and we've already on our path, and we have some problems with inequality, but it's not like you can't turn on the lights like in other countries. So that's just the science. But you can't do full net zero because we will still be producing some emissions. So you're going to have to use like natural solutions to reduce emissions, technology, and other pieces. I don't want to get into the credits. That's a very tricky thing. But what we say is that, you need to reduce emissions as far as you can possibly go. And then you need to remove the rest of the emissions. So it is actually just not entirely possible. That there are some areas, steel, it's very hard to be completely zero right now. But we have to be net zero, and there's a ton of work to do. But the good news is there's a ton of solutions that we aren't even using. So we need to just use those solutions, and we have to change our mindset. And there's also the status quo, including certain businesses that are very wed to the status quo. We have other options, and we need to move forward and make smart decisions for our future. It's a risk not to do it. It's a risk to our climate. It's a risk to our economy. and it's a huge opportunity. And by the way, I have 3 kids. That is what gets me up every morning. To be honest, like at the end of it, you know, all of this is really important. I want Kingston to do things, but the reason I get up and I do speeches like this, or I go and work, you know, do hard on a report for the Secretary General, or even my business, figuring out how do we scale big solutions, working with Indigenous peoples on nature, whatever it is, it's because it matters. There really could be nothing more important. So hopefully now that I'm almost tearing up, that's the motivating factor for all of you, whether you work for the city of Kingston doing, you know, great work as a public servant or as a politician, or you run a business, or you're retired, or you're a student. There's all ways we can all contribute. And so I encourage you to think about how you can do that personally, but also how you can support those in position of power who are really trying hard. Uh-oh, Ali, I can't hear you.
Final question for real. Final question for real. It is
Okay.
Kingston Climate Change Symposium. I wanted to give the final question to Kingston. Somebody had asked for cities like Kingston who are going to be working on their strategic plan in the coming months. What advice do you have? I'm wondering about a climate and EDI lens in particular, they say.
Sorry, repeat the question. I was trying to say everyone that you guys are awesome in the chat, but I won't try to do that while I'm listening to the question.
It's fair that you're doing that because I told you we were ending, but this is the last question.
Okay, sorry. I will be focused.
For cities like Kingston, who are going to be working on their strategic plan in the coming months, what advice do you have? And they're wondering about this from a climate and EDI lens.
Economic development lens. I try not to deal in acronyms because sometimes I get them wrong. But look, I mean, one, listen to people. Like you got all these people here. These are smart people who care. They're a great resource. And sometimes you're going to have thorny problems. Like you got a limit of the money you can spend. So you got to make choices. So I think engaging people in hard choices and not doing it behind closed doors, that's just kind of good free advice. But I think also just being diligent, like just really understanding where your emissions are coming from, and then just saying, okay, what are the solutions to reduce emissions? And of course, having an inclusivity and an economic lens. But as I said, like the thing about good policy is generally it's actually better for people and it's better for your economy and jobs. And I think it's awesome when I hear about companies like Li-Cycle or Unicorn, I think like coming to Kingston because they think it's a great community, cares about climate change. You got a clean grid. Those are all advantages. So look, have 3 things, like look at everything through a 3 lens, like you're reducing emissions, you're increasing inclusivity and reducing inequality, and you're creating jobs and economic opportunity. You can't go wrong, but you got to reduce your emissions. That is like number 1, just reduce your emissions. And there's a lot of solutions. The federal government actually has a ton of programs out there, but your best resource are your people. It seems like you got awesome people here who really care. And to the young people, you rock because you know about what we need to do, and you're kind of you're unforgiving, but you also see that you can make the change. And so keep it up. Keep it up.
All right, Catherine McKenna, thank you for your time. We were speaking of commitments. Ours was to not take too much of your time and wrap up the symposium by noon. So thank you so much for your passion and all the knowledge you've imparted. You can see the screen is ablaze with hearts. Thank you so much for.
All right. Well, I don't know how to do that, but hearts, thumbs up,
Hearts right back
to all of you.
That's
and
great.
good luck to Kingston. See ya.